Genetics as a social determinant of health. When you hear the words genetics and social determinants of health, you may be wondering how those words fit together. Our DNA is just our DNA, right? We get half our chromosomes from one parent and half from the other, and we're stuck with that for the rest of our lives. Well, that's not the whole story. Our DNA, or sequence of nitrogenous bases A, T, C, and G, that are transcribed and translated into proteins can't change, but the way that those genes are expressed can change. This is where the epigenetic theory comes into the picture. Epi means above, and genetic means genome, so epigenetics is anything that happens above the genome level. So imagine that your DNA is like a sentence. The sequence of bases is like the order of the letters in the sentence, and epigenetics is everything else that you can do with the sentence, like adding an apostrophe or a period or an exclamation point. Epigenetics encompasses processes that can change gene expression, not DNA sequence. These changes can occur for a multitude of reasons, including stressful and traumatic life experiences, and the changes can be inherited. There are three main mechanisms through which epigenetic changes occur. These mechanisms involve histones, methyl groups, and acetyl groups. Histones are protein complexes that DNA is wrapped around during its organization into chromosomes. Histones can move along a DNA strand, and as they do so, they can turn on and off different segments of the DNA by preventing molecules like RNA polymerase from accessing them. Acetyl groups bind to histones and relax the DNA that is wrapped around them, making the section of DNA more accessible and more easily expressed. Methyl groups bind to the cytosine bases in the DNA sequence. Methylation of DNA segments silences genes, and this epigenetic change can in some cases be passed from parents to children. These epigenetic changes are part of the reason why two people with the exact same DNA but different life experiences can have very different health outcomes.
For a moment, imagine your health as a Ferris wheel. Health is best when it is spinning perfectly. Everything is in order and held firmly together. The spokes are thick and strong and well secured to the middle axis point. So let's look at the elements that comprise this wheel. Let's imagine every spoke as a social determinant of health. Income and social status, employment and working conditions, education and literacy, childhood experiences, physical environment, social supports and coping skills, healthy behaviors, access to health services, gender, culture, and race. According to one source, biology and genetic endowment is better described as a fundamental determinant of health, opposed to a social determinant of health. So imagine that it is placed at the axis point in the middle where all the spokes meet. All parts are structured together and rely on each other to spin this Ferris wheel into optimal health. So how does epigenetics play into all this? All of the social determinants of health can influence biology and genetic endowment to some degree or another through epigenetics. Think of epigenetics as influencing the thickness of each spoke. It can work in favor of your health, which in this case the spokes would be thick and strong, or it can be a mechanism of poor health outcomes, which in this case the spokes will be thin and weaker. Essentially, any form of physical or psychological stress present in your life has an impact on the stability of the spokes through epigenetics. The thickness of the spokes has an effect on the structure of the wheel, which ultimately affects its ability to turn. Let's take a person who has a cancer gene that has been passed down through generations, and this person lives near a toxic dump, for example. The toxins in their environment puts physical stress on their cells and make them more predisposed to expressing that cancer gene. This makes that physical environment spoke weaker, and the Ferris wheel starts to creak a bit. Now, let's say this person lost their job and is now smoking to cope with stress, which poorly affects their genetic expression. This weakens the healthy behavior spoke, and this wheel slows down. Now let's add in another layer. While this is happening and the spokes are getting thinner and weaker, this burden is transferred to other spokes through the center axis, which represents genetic expression. Or in other terms, your biology and genetic expression are being influenced by your social and physical environment, which in this case are the social determinants of health. Now, let's look at how biology and genetic endowment can influence all the social determinants of health. Let's run with the same example and say poor circumstances prevail and that person does end up expressing that cancer gene. The axis of the Ferris wheel, which represents genetics, is now all run down and can't support all the spokes, and this causes some of them to get loose. Maybe they lose their job and the employment spoke becomes loose. And this also affects the income spoke, causing it to come loose because the central axis point can no longer sustain it. Now the wheel is super creaky and frail and turning very slow, which can have a domino effect on exasperating other social determinants of health. This is a dire example because maybe that person has good social support and through their cancer journey, they are eating healthy foods and can take time to rest because someone is helping them pay their bills. Those healthy habits interact with genes to strengthen the spokes and hence the middle axis. There is potential to rebuild and resecure the spokes on the Ferris wheel to the middle point and allow it to turn more smoothly once again, restoring health. Overall, biology and genetic endowment isn't directly a social determinant of health, but it's the mechanism through which all the social determinants of health influence each other.